And would it have been better if he would have approached that situation saying, "Help me understand what you do," rather than opening the conversation with, "Oh, you help people cheat"? Would that have been better? Yes, it would have. But if I would have proceeded in that conversation to get angry, to get defensive, to be like, "What the fuck, man? You've known me forever. Like, how dare you? How dare you fucking say that shit to me?" First of all, now I have completely shut down that conversation. I have shut out the opportunity for learning at that point. And also, I have shut down any future conversations that could have happened as well. Because now he's, oh, if I say something to Elizabeth, she's just going to get mad at me. Welcome to All the Love, the podcast where we deep dive into all things queer and non-monogamous relationships.
We're Ian Rowe, longtime practitioners in coaching, therapy, and education, with a focus on supporting humans in said relationships.
Every quarter, we pick a theme and host a series of live podcast recordings.
And here's one we made earlier.
Hope that it speaks to you.
All the love.
From E, that's me.
And Rowe, that's me. Okay, cute. Hello, my name's Rowe Moed. I am a writer, a relationship coach, and a transactional analysis psychotherapist. I have a private practice where I practice as a coach and a therapist. And I guess in terms of identity, what's important to share is that I am queer, I'm solo poly, I'm a relationship anarchist myself, and I'm also a massive nerd, and I love talking about this stuff. I have a background in adult education. Before I became a coach, I was working in adult education for 10 years and then also became a teacher trainer. So I'm very invested in expressing things in a way that people can understand and helping people to learn. And I think applying that to learning about ourselves and our relationships and what we want from our relationships is what I'm investing my time in now. Keeping it short and sweet, that's all that needs to really be shared right now by me, I feel. Is that too short and too sweet?
I love it. I'm impressed. I'm very impressed. I've been trying to shorten mine as well. This has been a practice. All right. So my name is Elizabeth Cunningham. I've been working in gender and sexuality and relationships since 2008. My background and degrees are in political science and women, gender, and sexuality. I worked at a domestic violence center for 3 years in education and community outreach, which means that I taught people about what domestic violence is, how people are impacted by it, why it happens, and how you can get out of those relationships. And then I determined that I wanted to switch my focus to being on the more preventative side to help people get into healthy relationships. And I chose transformational life coaching because it's a modality that's been very helpful and useful for me in my life. And I've studied multiple different types of transformational life coaching and have put it all together with my experience and background in gender, sexuality, and relationships, and have been coaching polyamorous and queer folks since 2017. And now I also have been running a certification program for people who want to get trained as a queer and non-monogamous relationship coach as well, who don't want to go through 15 years of random education pulling from multiple different sources, and they just want to learn all in one go. I'm very interested in having people be self-expressed in who they are and being able for that to translate to supportive and healthy relationships. And I think relationship anarchy for me is such a great way to learn how to break down the shoulds and supposed tos of relationships, even if you are not a relationship anarchist. I think this is such a great study. But I would say that I fall into the category of being a relationship anarchist. I'm also polyamorous, and I represent the L in the LGBTQIA alphabet mafia. All right. So without further ado, what we are talking about today is the fourth principle inside of Andie Nordgren's Relationship Anarchy Manifesto, which is what we've been using to put this live podcast together. So the fourth principle is heterosexism is rampant and out there, but don't let fear lead you. Remember that there is a very powerful normative system in play that dictates what real love is and how people should live. Many will question you and the validity of your relationships when you don't follow these norms. Work with the people you love to find escapes and tricks to counter the worst of the problematic norms. Find positive counterspells and don't let fear drive your relationships.
Really fun language in this one. I feel it's
I
really creative
love it.
compared to previous ones, which are pretty like straight down the line. These are some words that mean things. I think this one is a lot more creative and playful with the language, like counterspells, escapes, and tricks. It's got this mischief about it.
Ooh, yeah, no, I love it. When I was reading it this morning, I was writing down little notes and stuff that I wanted to talk about. And that's also what struck me as well. I was like, oh, I love the language. Counter spells. Yes, I want to create counter spells. My inner witch who never found her coven.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So, heterosexism, what the fuck is it? I think
Yeah,
that's probably the first question to address because I don't
I
think it's
think we
a
should.
that people use in everyday life. And actually, frankly, I think I first came across it when I read this manifesto for the first time. Do you want to take that, or do you want me to give you what I am understanding from that term?
I mean, if you want to, I just Googled it really quick.
Why don't we take your Google definition?
Yeah, the Google definition is discrimination or prejudice against gay people on the assumption that heterosexuality is the normal sexual orientation.
Yeah, nice. I think that is basically it. What I've written down as my own definition is a system that treats heterosexuality and often heterosexual coupledom as more natural, serious, respectable, stable, and desirable than other ways of loving or organizing intimacy. In this way, it's closely tied to mononormativity and amatonormativity. So those are more words we probably need to define.
Go for it.
So, mononormativity, the normalization of monogamy as the most desirable, stable, secure, mature approach to relationships, and as the approach to relationships that we think everybody should be aiming for. And it's found in phrases, microaggressions such as, yeah, sure, you're polyamorous now, but when you get married, you're going to close the relationship. That's an example of mononormativity in action because it's the assumption that somebody is obviously working towards monogamy or obviously wants it on some level. And amatonormativity, moving on to that, is the normativity around romantic relationships. So it's the assumption that people want and are always working towards having a romantic relationship with someone else. So heterosexual might suggest sexuality and not romance, but I think it also encompasses romantic normativity and mononormativity within it. So you must be straight, you must be monogamous, and you must want romance. These are all the things that are so normalized in our society. And the truth is, there are loads of people who don't want any of those things or want some and not all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that covers the need for the expansion of it, right? Which is, it's not just about heterosexism, because when we talk about heterosexism, we're just talking about sexual orientation. And that's not just what we're talking about. We're also talking about relationship orientation. And we're also talking about, as you pointed out, with amatonormativity, that the assumption that people should or will naturally have romantic or sexual relationships in their life. Right.
It's about the whole normative structure that tells people which of their relationships are real and really count and which ones are not really easy to understand or will be punished even. It goes a lot deeper than just you got to be straight. I think there's a lot more within this and within the manifesto as a whole. So yeah, definitely think that's important. And it can be a little bit of an obscuring term, I think. So I think it's really important to define those terms quite clearly from the start of our conversation. As usual, we could go through this line by line. There's so much in each line, but is there anything, Elizabeth, that's standing out to you that you want to dive into first?
Do you have a preference? I have thoughts, but I'm curious if you have a preference.
No, I'm asking because I want to know what
Okay.
you
Well, okay, thank you. Because I think in talking about what we just talked about, it encompasses the first bullet point, which is remember that there is a very powerful normative system in play that dictates what real love is and how people should live. And I think people who are relationship anarchists or who want to look through the lens of relationship anarchy, that if we just take those terms, heterosexism, mononormativity, amatonormativity, and you just apply them to yourselves and just ask the question curiously for yourself, where does this impact me, or what beliefs, what underlying beliefs do I have? Last episode, we talked a lot about beliefs and values, but what beliefs do I have that uphold this? And just recognizing that a majority of us were brought up in cultures where these standards do exist, that we all have some sort of ingrained belief around these things, right? Just because you call yourself relationship anarchist, or just because you're polyamorous, or just because you're queer, doesn't mean that you don't have ingrained heterosexism, ingrained mononormativity, ingrained amatonormativity. I know for myself, definitely inside of amatonormativity, there's a lot of things that I've been unpacking just personally in the past several years, being like, oh yeah, like why do I assume that every person wants or will have romantic and sexual relationships? That is 100% how I assume things will go for people. And so just unpacking that, I think starting with ourselves is really important, because I think when we start talking about isms, right? When we start talking about systems of oppression, it's easy to fall into the victim role. Yeah, it really sucks. Other people suck. The culture sucks. This is really hard. It's really challenging when people say X, Y, and Z, which is not untrue. Like that can all be true. And we want to, I think, a more powerful way and more empowered way to approach these topics is to consider for ourselves, where do we carry this, so that we can unpack it for ourselves, so that we can feel freer about it. And then that's also going to help with these other bullet points, which is work with the people that you love to find escapes and tricks to counter the worst or these problematic norms. If you're coming from trying to find escapes from a place of disempowerment, like I am being put down, then those tricks that you come up with might still have you be disempowered. Whereas if you can find a way to empower yourself by letting yourself be free of these things by working through it, then the escapes tricks that you find will probably be more empowering for you, most likely.
Yeah, there's a lot in what you said that I want to respond to. There's so many
Great.
layers. It's really interesting. This is just a question, I guess, that people may have. How do I know when I'm coming from an empowered place? How do I know when I'm victimizing myself? But the principle that we're looking at today is driving at that we may not know, because there is a powerful normative system in which we are making our choices, and it will be impacting us in ways that we're not fully conscious of. And I could say for myself, 9 years into personal therapy, 3.5 years into therapy training, 5 years working as a coach, or however many years, I've lost track, but lots of work on personal growth and personal development for myself and with other people and training. And I'm still fucking finding out stuff that I didn't know I thought and felt and believed. So there are layers and layers of conditioning to uncover. And I would just encourage people not to be too perfectionist about it, just to be curious and open-minded and keep questioning, be open to questioning. Am I doing this because it's the way that I have adapted to a society that puts pressure on me to behave this way? Or is this actually authentically what I want? Because pressure comes from so many directions. It comes from family, from religion, maybe even the law puts pressure on us in subtle ways to make decisions.
Or not subtle ways.
True, not so subtle. Like housing being expensive puts pressure on us to couple up and to pair up with people. There are pressures from social status, from media narratives, and just everyday conversation with people. You throwaway comments, like I was saying earlier, the microaggressions that we hear. And people may think they're doing something because it's legitimately what they desire. And in fact, it's what they're doing to appear normal and to be approved of by the society that they live in. And that goes for absolutely all of us. And it's a frightening thing, I think, to contemplate that you might not even know your own mind. But it's also, in a way, an exciting thing. And this speaks to what you were saying about not being a victim with a capital V, as I would put it. Victim with a lowercase v is a real life victim, someone who actually is the recipient of persecution. And we are all victimized to some extent by our society in that sense. But a victim with a capital V is when we're giving ourselves that label and we're engaging in drama to avoid actually being accountable for what we can change. And in that position, we will perceive society as persecutor with a capital P that has all the power and there's literally nothing we can do about it. I wash my hands of responsibility. And we also think there's probably some capital R rescuer out there who's going to make it all better for us. Sorry, the rescuer is you. You are it. So I think, yeah, I really liked what you're saying about claiming the power that you have and making decisions from an empowered place.
I think one thing that I really want to highlight about what you said is that this is a lifelong process. There's no place to get to here. And I can look back 10 years ago for myself and see how I was operating, even though I've been doing this work for over 15 years. And so 10 years ago was like 6 years into doing this work. And I was still, even though I was more empowered than I was 10 years prior to that, before I started doing this work, right? I can still look back at age 26 and be like, wow, I really still had a long way to go. And I hope that at 46, that I look back at 36 and I'm like, wow, I still really had a long way to go, you know? So understanding and not shaming ourselves, like not feeling embarrassed, not feeling guilty or wrong for having these ingrained systems be a part of how we think and what we believe. There's nothing wrong. That's totally normal that you would be a product of the environment that you grew up in, right? And I say environment as a large umbrella term for the region that you grew up in, maybe the country, maybe the neighborhood, maybe the school you went to, also your skin color, your race, your gender, your sexuality, like all of that shaped the environment around who you were, shaped how you feel and what you believe. That is totally normal. And so doing this work is not to shame anyone, it's not to have you feel guilty, it's not even to have you feel superior or inferior. It really is to get curious. And that's also going to give you more empowerment around this too, is if you can come from a place of curiosity, care, compassion, understanding of yourself and also of others, practicing non-judgment of yourself and of others.
Yeah, definitely. And I think people cling to conventional structures, maybe sometimes because it actually works for them, but also sometimes because they're trying to secure confirmation of their validity, confirmation that their love is real. These are all things that are very natural for us to want as social beings. We want to have people think that our relationships are meaningful and real and difficult to dismiss because we all want to feel like we're in real, meaningful relationships. And what I like about this principle is that it says, don't let fear lead you, which to me doesn't say, don't have fear. Don't let fear lead you means you're going to have fear, but that doesn't mean it has to be in charge of you. You can see it, recognize it's there, be with it, work with it, soothe it, whatever you need to do, and then make a decision. Maybe it's useful to bring in a little bit of transactional analysis. So very basically, one of the key ideas of TA is that you have different parts of yourself, and the parent part of yourself, which is written usually with a capital P to distinguish it from actual parents, is everything that's put into us from outside. And it becomes not something that's outside us, it becomes something that's then inside us. So maybe your environment tells you that if you are not in a heterosexual, monogamous, romantic relationship, then you as a person are less valid. You might have heard that in exactly those words, or you might have inferred that from the way people talk about things, or a look on someone's face when they saw a gay couple holding hands, or whatever. You can infer it in a number of ways and make meaning of that. And then at some point, it becomes part of you and it becomes indistinguishable from who you are. But if you can see that's just part of you, that's what's been put into you, and separate that from yourself, your core self, which is your adult, the part of you that's in the here and now, reacting how you want to appropriately to the situation, then it's never going to go away necessarily completely, but you can look at it as an observer with some distance and not feel quite so much that it's part of who you are or is who you are. And then that way, I think, is how you can allow fear not to start organizing your relationships from the inside. It's like a spy behind enemy lines, organizing things, it's infiltrating and making decisions for you. And it's how you don't judge yourself for the things that you have internalized. If you can say, oh, okay, that was from outside of me. That isn't who I am. That's just something that was put into me without my consent. Yeah, I'll pause there because I can see you having deep thoughts and I feel myself losing my coherence. So
I completely understand what you mean. And also, I think that you're making really great points. I think one way to recognize that, because I think that's the question that I get most often when having conversations like this. It's okay, yes, I hear you. I agree. I'm on the same page. And how do I do that? And there's multiple different ways in which you can unpack these things, but I think some of the easiest ways to do this as a self-study is to notice what you judge in yourself and others. That's easiest thing to do. Like, first of all, get curious and become a little bit more aware of the judgments that you have. And that can often come up as being irritated by things, being annoyed by things. There's some sort of charged emotion around it, feeling guilty, ashamed, embarrassed, things that you don't want to talk about. One of the examples that I thought of from what we were talking about earlier is one of the reasons why I hear people who don't want to come out as non-monogamous or polyamorous is because they fear that they are going to lose their job or lose their standing at their job. So that's a really obvious kind of, okay, let's unpack that. Let's unpack that fear. And it doesn't mean that's not valid. Like, unpacking something doesn't mean that you now have to act on it. It just means that it's a place to start examining your own fear and your own beliefs. And that can often come out as judgment. The other thing, too, is notice what you say about relationships. When you're talking, start to clock things that for you is like an of course. Of course. Of course they would believe that. Listen to it in gossip with people. When people gossip about relationships, one of my guilty pleasures is watching reaction videos on YouTube to terrible wedding moments. It's
very
such
unique.
I know it's so niche, but I don't know what it is about it, but the drama and the gossip of it, I just eat it up. It's like my soap opera. Like, my mom watched soap operas when I was little, and I watch reaction videos to terrible wedding videos.
What's
But
terrible about them? Sorry, yeah, go on.
what's terrible about them is the way that people are behaving. And so then in the reaction videos, they're like, the person who's reacting to it is either agreeing with it or disagreeing with it. And so also noticing when people, either yourself or others, agree or disagree with something. Why are you agreeing with that? Or why are you disagreeing with that? Why is it obvious to you? Take the case that it's not obvious. Like one of them is, of course, if you have a wedding, then you would never fill in the blank. Of course, if you had a wedding, you would never do X. If you were the sister of the bride, you would never say X. Okay, why? Why do we have that? We're just starting to question those things. So just noticing when there's a charged emotion, noticing when there's a you should agree with this or of course, and notice it for yourself too. That'll also help you be less judgmental. I watch these reaction videos and I turn it around on myself. I'm like, huh, where do I really judge people for doing stuff like that? Interesting. Why do I judge people around that? What is it about that? What do I think I'm right about?
Yeah. I think you're very good at questioning yourself, and it is a practice. And I took a screenshot the other day of a comment section under a video on Instagram because I was like, oh, this is hierarchy in action, big time. These are people who are not at all questioning the hierarchies that they believe in. And that doesn't mean that their perspective is wrong and mine is right. It's just not a relationship anarchist one.
Right.
And hierarchical or not, it was just an example of people having these strong shoulds and judgments. And basically the video was somebody playing out a skit between two people, and one of them is pissed because the other one has shared something with their husband that the first person said in confidence. And the first person literally asked them, please don't share this with anyone. And the friend assumed that meant, but not my husband. My husband's not just anyone. I can share everything with him. And in the comments section, it was just full of people agreeing that, nope, husband and wife shouldn't have secrets. That's a literal quote. I fully expect what I say to my friends to be relayed to their husbands. That's marriage. With all due respect, marriage is more important than any friendship. It was just full of these comments. And I was like, you're allowed to feel that way. And that is a very common feeling in society. That is a powerful normative system at play as well. So that was an example of people where they're really not questioning it. And I do wonder if it is fear that is leading those assumptions, fear of stepping outside the norm, of going against what society deems to be correct. I think a lot of people will fall in line with stuff, not because they actually believe it, but because saying anything different will get you into conflict with other people. I could say that firsthand, that saying different things online has got me into conflict with a lot of people. No matter how gently I try to say something, no matter how I say, this is just something to consider and you can make whatever decision is right for you. Even just the very fact of naming that there are other ways of doing things can be profoundly triggering for people. And it can make them really mocking and rude and condescending. There's huge anger and criticism. As you were saying, there's a real anger and annoyance behind it. And I think that is often an indicator that there is some norm-based judgment going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, since it's ingrained, and your example earlier was perfect, where it's like we make a decision about something based off of something, whether it's explicit or implicit, specifically around like homophobia in my life. I'm from Nebraska and I grew up in the Midwest, but it was totally okay to be gay in my house. Like my parents are very progressive. My parents also had gay friends. So from a very young age, I was around people of different sexual orientations, and that was totally normal for me as a little kid, which is great. I'm very happy about that in my upbringing. But it wasn't until I was 10, and I remember I was 10 because we had just moved to Kansas, and I was on the playground, and this little boy, he was literally a 10-year-old boy, was like, gay people are disgusting. And I was like, what? What are you saying right now? Because in my mind, everyone knew that being gay was okay because that's how I had grown up. I was like, no, what are you talking about? What do you mean? And he's, oh yeah, like Jesus said, blah, 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 whatever. He was like a little Christian kid. Kansas is in the Bible Belt. And I was like, first of all, I don't know anything about what Jesus said, but that's crazy. And I went home and like my whole world was shattered by that because I was just like, oh, there are people who actually believe this. And I went home and I asked my mom, I was like, this kid said this thing on the playground. And she was like, yeah, some people believe that. And I was like, why? That's so mean. That's so wrong. And she was like, yeah, that is what some people believe. And so then having to reconcile with this new worldview, right? And I've had that in the opposite direction too, where it's, oh man, I have a belief that now I realize is actually hurtful to other people. But it is that shattering of worldview that people have a really hard time with. And I say people as in everyone. It's a protective mechanism to lash out. It's a protective mechanism to make the other person wrong. It's a protective mechanism to just not look at any other facts other than the ones that you think are correct. And if we got into more of a conversation about how do we impact change, because I believe that we can have impactful conversations here. I think in having conversations like this, you have to be able to discern what people you can have conversations with and what people you just can't have a conversation with, at least not right now. So recognizing when people are willing to consider other points of view and when people are not, right? So inside of this bullet point, many will question you and the validity of your relationships when you don't follow these norms. Work with the people you love to find escapes and tricks to counter the worst of the problematic norms. I think one of those tricks for me has been that discernment of who's ready to have this conversation and who's not ready to have this conversation. And for the people who aren't, you have to let it go as best as you can. But you still can have conversations with people who are ready, right? And for me, the trick is also focusing on those people, focusing on the people who are willing to have a conversation, who are willing to understand you, who are willing to listen, focusing on those people. That is also how social change happens over time, is when we focus on the people who are just outside of or just adjacent to how we believe and who are willing to have a conversation. And you also have to be willing to have the conversation.
Yeah, I like that we're starting to move into possible escapes and tricks, because I think that would be a good thing for us to definitely touch on today. But there's so much in what you said, and I'm not going to be able to get to all of it now. Perhaps in the Q&A later, things may come up. But I was just thinking that it is a protective mechanism, as you say, to follow norms. And how that might look in relationships also is by, for example, treating one partner as primary and others as secondary, because you fear the impact it will have on your partner, you fear what it will mean for your relationship, you fear what it will mean for the people who know about your many relationships. Many people will assume you have one real true partner, and others who are just like fun, but you'd let them go in a heartbeat if your partner said so. That's kind of the norm of what people, if they're even a little bit willing to understand that relationships don't have to be monogamous, they often, the next step is, well, it's just monogamy plus other relationships then. And relationship anarchy is not that. Yeah, like a fear-based decision there would be to submit to hierarchy even if it doesn't feel right for you. Yeah, it's just in the name of seeming sensible and decent and not too much in the eyes of society, in the eyes of your friends. There's so many things you said, and I'm going to be jumping around a little bit. I liked your story, even though it's sad, obviously, about the boy saying that gay people are disgusting, and for you to hear that as a queer person is really hard. But I think it's lovely that you grew up in a household where you believed the opposite, and it really shows the power of normativity, that you can teach someone to believe anything. And you don't have to teach them hateful bullshit. So I really like that. And another example, just a quick aside, is my brother was born in the time of Margaret Thatcher. Now, that's a complex figure. We don't need to go into that. But he was born in a time when Margaret Thatcher was the prime minister. And when John Major became the prime minister after her, he was watching this be announced on TV. And he asked my mum, can a man do that job? He didn't know. His normative view of the world was that women have positions of power. women have the top position of power. Mum's in charge of the household, Margaret Thatcher's in charge of the country. Is a man even to be trusted with that level of responsibility?
Oh my God, that just healed something in my heart.
So it just goes to show that people instill things in children that stick with them for life. And if you, as a child, don't ever see a woman in power, only see men in power, then you're going to grow up thinking that men have the most power and are the most trusted. And that's why they have power, because they are trusted and good. And it's circular thinking, obviously. So, yeah, I just think to really hit home the idea that norms can be instilled in us and can seem so natural, and they can be a force for good or not such good. But going on to the idea of counterspells, escapes, and tricks, I did make a list of some ideas around this. So one idea I had was developing scripts for intrusive questions rather than getting pulled into apologetic explanations. And I think this speaks to what you were saying around, first of all, choosing who you speak to about this. There are some people that you can really take your time over explaining your choices in life and your relationship style to. And there are other people where it's just really not worth your energy because they're not invested in mutual understanding. They're invested in being right. And for the most part, you can practice having these conversations and get better at them so you don't have to be having them from scratch every time. One example I have here is my aunt once asked me, if you really loved your partner, wouldn't you want to have all of him to yourself? And my answer was, it's because I love him that I don't want to have him all to myself. That's a script that I've said many times. And then I elaborate, obviously. I'm not just like, mic drop, bye. But, I said I want him to have all the love in the world. I want him to explore connections to their fullest extent. I want him to get things from other relationships that he may not be able to get with me. And I want us to enjoy each other to the extent that we can and should. She, being a great lady who just wants the best for me, was really open to that and said, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I see it. And it was also the counterspell that I cast on the situation was saying it like it's no big deal. And I think if you say things with confidence, it goes a long way. Again, bringing in the idea of parent, adult, child. If you say it from adult with a sense of solidness in your perspective and confidence and like it really is in alignment with who you are, then you're inviting other people to respond to you from that place. But if you say it from a child place, which is your kind of old feelings, thoughts, and behaviors, maybe a part of you that needs approval a bit more and is a bit more vulnerable and dependent and fearful, if you say it with that apology in your voice and your words, then you're inviting people to be critical of you. So a little bit of faking it till you make it, but that is also another point on the manifesto, so I won't go into that right now in too much detail. Did you have any other ideas for counter spells or escapes and tricks?
Yeah, so I completely agree with you about how you say something, and also in the same vein, how you receive things as well. And so I've really done my best to train myself inside of, if someone says something to me, I'm going to receive it as not a problem. And not because it's not a problem. And I'm going to give you an example here in a second, actually. But not because it's not a problem, but because if I receive it as not a problem, then I am not adding charge to the situation. I'm not trying to fight fire with fire. I'm trying to extinguish fire. I'm not trying to create a bonfire out of conversations. The other thing is to recognize the context of the situation as well. Like, where is this person coming from? Giving them the benefit of the doubt, if that is appropriate. Some people, if you have a history with them and they just do things to antagonize you, then probably giving them the benefit of the doubt would not be in your best interest. But depending on the situation, I feel like a lot of situations you can really give people the benefit of the doubt that they're speaking from a place of ignorance. They're speaking from a place of their own unexamined, ingrained beliefs. I also give people the benefit of the doubt that the reason that they are bringing this to me, the reason they are saying this to me, the reason they are asking me this question is because they actually want to know, like they want to learn, even if they ask the question in an inappropriate way. So that's from my point of view. And then, so the example is I was approached by a guy who I've known my entire life. He's one of my dad's friends. So he's known me since I was a baby. And I probably see him almost every single time that I come home. Like, we don't have a really close relationship, but we've known each other my entire life. And he came up to me and he was like, "So, Elizabeth, tell me more about what it is you do. You like help people cheat?"
Yeah, you got it. That's right.
I was like, "No." I was like, "No, I don't help people cheat." And I laughed. I just laughed.
It's probably the best counterspell there is to that kind of comment.
One of the best counter spells is to just be like, not laugh at the person. Like, I wasn't laughing at him. I wasn't like,
No.
"Oh, you said you're such an idiot." It was just like, "What are you talking about?"
What a wildly incorrect thing to say.
No, but I laughed. And then what I said was, "No, I don't help people cheat." And he was like, "Okay, help me understand." And would it have been better if he would have approached that situation saying, "Help me understand what you do," rather than opening the conversation with, "Oh, you help people cheat"? Would that have been better? Yes, it would have. But if I would have proceeded in that conversation to get angry, to get defensive, to be like, "What the fuck, man? You've known me forever. Like, how dare you? How dare you fucking say that shit to me?" First of all, now I have completely shut down that conversation. I have shut out the opportunity for learning at that point. And also, I have shut down any future conversations that could have happened as well. Because now he's, "Oh, if I say something to Elizabeth, she's just going to get mad at me." So I try to approach things like, this is not a problem because number one, I do want to stay open. And also, number two, I know that it takes multiple conversations for people to understand things like this. I want to keep that door open. And that's me personally. I'm not trying to dictate how people do stuff like this, but that's my personal belief. And so that's my trick, is to be like, this is not a problem. I want to keep this door open. We're going to bring some humor to it because that was a crazy thing to say. And now we're really going to talk about it. I was like, "No, I teach people, educate people, coach people on polyamory." And then I explained what polyamory was, and he was like, "Huh, that's very interesting." And I don't know how he feels about it now, but it was an open, fun, productive conversation, even though he opened it very inappropriately.
If I were to apply a transactional analysis lens to that, I'd say he was coming at you from a parental position and you responded from adult. So you didn't answer the invitation to go into child and to feel criticized and to lash out. And you didn't retaliate with your own parental, "No, you're wrong," sort of pointing at him and talking down to him. You weren't vying for power in that conversation. And it comes from the fact that you are someone who knows yourself very well and knows the truth and understands to some extent how people work, and that people often say things that are very wrong because they grow up in a culture that teaches them these things, and that just makes sense. And also that it comes from a place of knowing that the best way to reach people is by remaining an adult. And I presume in your work as a coach as well, you sometimes get people coming at you from parent and child, people getting their feelings talking about relationships, and part of the work is remaining really steady in the face of that and just gently but firmly continuing to interact from adult.
Yeah.
I liked that story, and I think it's a great example. Yeah, if the dominant culture casts really strong spells about what love is, then we need to find counter spells that protect us. And I think a big way of protecting ourselves is by remembering that people sometimes say things that are hurtful out of ignorance rather than malice.
Right. And then that's why I said giving people the benefit of the doubt, because it was absolutely appropriate for me to give this person the benefit of the doubt. I know that if I called this man and I was like, "Hey, if I don't get this emergency medical treatment that costs me $15,000 by tomorrow, like I'm going to die, he'd be like, okay, great, we're gonna get that $15,000. Like, I'm on it. He absolutely and totally cares about me as a human being. And so it was 100% appropriate for me to give him the benefit of the doubt, even if he said something inappropriate, you know?
First of all, your medical system sucks.
Yeah.
But that should never
Accurate.
happen. That should never be allowed to happen. And I think the same for my aunt, that what she said was, if you loved him, wouldn't you want him to yourself? The implication of that is, I don't think you really love him, because my view of the world and how relationships work is that when you love someone, this is what you want. So I could have been super offended by that and I could have retaliated, but I also know that it comes from her being in a mononormative society. And she's 80 years old. Society has for a long time been this way. Certainly since she was a very young girl, like that was massively normalized. Also patriarchal roles and all the rest of it.
All that.
We need
All
to
right.
hold ourselves back, don't we? We have so much to
Yes,
say.
I was just gonna say, any concluding remarks? Obviously, we could talk about this for the rest of the day and our lives, which we probably will. But yeah, any closing remarks before we turn it over to Q&A?
I think you alluded to this, but I want to say again to make sure it's clear that not being driven by fear doesn't mean that you ignore risk. There is risk sometimes. And there is a difference between having privacy and being ashamed of things. I'll leave that there. Just drop that in. Hope it makes sense.
I think that is an important thing to say. And then my concluding remark, because we mostly talked about the outwardness of this, so having conversations with people outside of your relationships who may be judging, and we didn't talk necessarily as much about inside of your relationships and what you can do inside of your relationships. And so what I will say about that very briefly is to bring the benefit of the doubt and also to bring humor and play into it too. If we were having fun, if we were being playful, if we were bringing joy to this, to our relationship, to this situation, what then? How would that change it? What would we do? What would be possible?
Lovely. I love the questions you have. So we are going to open the floor now to Q&A. Feel free to unmute and to speak to us. That would be great. We love having people's voice, especially as this is an audio format. However, if you have questions that you would rather not say out loud, feel free to put them in the chat, write them down, and we'll get to as many as we can today. And if you, another layer deeper than that, don't want to put it in the chat and want it to be completely anonymous and don't feel comfortable putting it in the public chat, you can direct message either me or Elizabeth and we will try and get to it. We'll try and be as fair as possible with the order in which we address stuff. So we already have a question in the chat. Should we do that one? And then everyone, if you're listening and thinking, you can start formulating it in your heads now.
Let's do the chat one because that's been in there for a second and then we'll go on to the next person.
Okay. So it says, would love a script around the idea that solo poly and relationship anarchy means a lack of depth or commitment. I find myself answering this often, that my solo poly life means that I have empty interactions devoid of deep levels of consideration or commitment. Ugh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's me. I get that all the time. That because I'm a relationship anarchist or not interested in even the framework of polyamory, that kitchen table is better or that hierarchical polyamory is better. I answer that often. No, it doesn't mean that I'm not open to committed or long-term relationships or that my interactions are purely casual. And I would love a counterspell or some sort of script for kind of addressing that because I think I address it in multiple ways and I want to be like really clear.
Hi, Steph. Thank you for coming on.
Hi.
You know, it's wonderful to hear your voice and see your face.
Yeah, here I am. I'm at work, so I'm practicing capitalist anarchy right now. I know, right?
Cool. Road. I have some examples, but I'm curious if you have an immediate answer for that.
I identify the same way, solo poly relationship anarchist, and so I get similar comments myself. I don't know if I have a snappy sort of one-liner like I did for my aunt, and I'm sure that what I have to say is probably going to be stuff that you've said.
Damn it, that's what I wanted. I wanted a snappy one-liner. I'm just kidding.
No, maybe as we talk about this, you will be able to extract snappy one-liners from what we're saying. Yeah, I guess my instinct would be to turn it around on the other person and ask them what commitment means to them. And often they will start to say that commitment means that you are dedicated to building a relationship, that you care deeply about someone, that you build a life with them. And then you ask them, what does build a life mean? And they then say it means live with them and get married and have children. And you say, okay, that's not what build a life means to me. I can still have very deep and meaningful committed relationships that are based on the quality of the connection that we have, on emotional support. And maybe the snappy one-liner is this: that solo polyamory is not about being emotionally independent from other people. It's about being practically independent from other people.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I don't want empty connections. I want depth, but I did the build a life definition for a really long time, and we evolved out of that. So I have the really long relationship experience under my belt. I am raising children with a now platonic co-parent. So it's very clear in my actions and kind of my life that's displayed outwardly to other people that I am a very committed person. So that question always strikes me off guard a little bit. What do you mean empty? Have you met me? What's going on? So yeah, maybe I think that's a good distinction between like practically autonomous and separate and not emotionally. So
yeah, absolutely. Our relationships are still real. There's emotional dependence in a healthy way, interdependence. But it's for me about that practical independence and not automatically going up the relationship escalator. And it seems like there are some steps you've taken, but you still very much seem to be practicing solo polyamory in the way that you approach those things. I want to make sure I keep some room for you, Elizabeth, to respond as well. You said you had some ideas.
Yeah, like I think depending on how you know the person, I personally wouldn't say this to everyone, but if I have a closer relationship with someone, I might say, what about me and in my life is not committed to you?
I have said that.
Have you?
Have you met me is what I've said. Have you met me?
Have you met me? Yeah. Tell me what about my life is not commitment to you.
Yeah.
But something that I might say to everyone is turning it around to examples in their life where they have committed relationships that are not romantic or sexual. And I often go to friendships for that. I'm like, tell me how, like, your longest friendship.
Yeah.
Are you committed to that person? Wouldn't you say that you're committed to that person? My best counter spells, I think, are thinking of examples in their life where it's, you actually have this as a practice. We're just not using the same words.
Yeah. That's an interesting connection because I use that often when I talk about polyamory in general, and that I talk about like friendships being a polyamorous example, and that I find a new friend and I don't say to all my other friends, sorry, you guys, it's time for me to go because I found the one and it's time to cut you off. So yeah, that's an interesting and like an easy go-to for me. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And if there's something else that is an example of commitment in their life, then like if they've had the same career for a really long time, if they're really committed to a family relationship like their parents, or they're really close with their mom, or even if they have a pet that they've had forever, it's, you have different long-term commitments in your life that you prioritize simultaneously.
Okay. I don't want to take up the space for everybody else, but thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steph.
It's a very relevant question. Thank you.
Julia.
Hi, good to see you again. I was thinking about and I don't want this to sound provocative because I don't mean it this way, but for me, relationship anarchy has always been also a political stance to life and to interacting with people. And I feel like I agree absolutely with you have to unpack your own value and belief system. And this is hard. And this is work you have to do with safe people and safe environments. And you can't just, I don't know, go out there and just tell everybody because it's maybe not safe for you or your relationships. But I also feel like this finding tricks and escapes can lead to some kind of escapism. Like some friends of mine, they found their group, their relationship, and they're just in there and they stay in there and they lose touch with the political system around them. And I feel like one part of relationship anarchy for me is taking the stance and bringing yourself out there if it's safe for you to do. And I would love your thoughts on that. I don't know if I made myself clear.
I think you're making yourself extremely clear.
I agree. You want to go first, Elizabeth, because I took the last one first?
Sure. Also, I agree with you completely, Julia. Like, I absolutely take the opinion and belief that our identities are political. And I think, especially with things like relationship anarchy, where we are dismantling systems in which we live in our personal life, I understand the value that you have of continuing to spread, make change, be aware of the systems outside of yourself and the unworkability that you see around people escaping into their own bubble, right? What responsibility do we have to our community at large? And what are we doing, even in small ways, to either be visible or to take a stance on something or to say things outside of ourselves, etc. And this is an ongoing conversation. My belief inside of this is that there's not necessarily like a right answer. However, if we look at it from the point of view of, are we trying to not just make life better for ourselves, but make life better for our community? If we look at it from that lens, I think we have a responsibility to say things outside of ourselves, even in smaller ways. You don't have to make live podcasts like Ro and I are doing, but even in small ways, like having conversations with the people in your life, challenging norms in small ways on a regular basis. When people do share a microaggression against you, that, maybe not every single time, because that's exhausting, but at least part of the time that you say something, right? I personally believe that if we're looking at the responsibility that we have as being a part of this community, that there is a responsibility to speak up, to take a stand, to even take small actions towards that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think also maybe there's something to be said for the insular approach. Like, maybe at first, if you feel shaky in your views on something and you feel like you're very prone to being persuaded away from what you feel and you don't feel confident in expressing yourself, for a time it can be useful to be supported by a community that aligns with your perspective and to just be surrounded by people who are yes men to your views on stuff to some extent. But I do see what you're saying about we can't do that forever necessarily. And it's once you've taken strength from your community and that process of surrounding yourself with like-minded people, after that, then you're able to go out and make an impact and change things. And I think some of us maybe have more of a duty or a responsibility to do that than others. For some of us, the risk is greater and others it's less. I felt very strongly that as someone who is self-employed, so I don't have an employer to answer to, I don't have the fear of discrimination. As someone who is white, who's middle class, who is educated, who has a posh voice, so people listen to me and think I'm smart and I'm saying sensible things even when I'm not. As all of those things, as someone who has a strong belief in this, I felt there was a duty for me to speak out about it. I have a privilege that allows me to do that as well. So I know that you're not discounting privileges that people have. I can hear that in the way you're asking the question, but that maybe some of us bear more of a responsibility to speak out about these things than others.
Yeah. The other thing that I want to speak to is more directly to you, Julia, because I am making an assumption that we feel very similarly about this just based off of like how you've asked the question. But if I get this wrong, please tell me. I think that when you are someone who has a very strong value of justice and fairness in interpersonal relationships, it can be a pitfall for ourselves to project that onto other people. And then how we hold ourselves back by doing that is focusing more of our energy on what people aren't doing and being upset about that rather than focusing on what people are doing and what we can be doing.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like this was maybe the feeling I got a long time ago when I started doing stuff like this, thinking about it. But yeah, I think I got better at it in a way, in accepting people where they are and why they maybe keep silent. And also, I think it was also important for me because, like, emotionally, I totally get it to stay in the bubble or whatever. And I also think that some of us are more privileged and therefore have more responsibility for our communities. And I want to make it easier for people who are in contact with me and who are maybe white, middle class, Western European people who can speak up in most ways that they are able to, and that they are also not afraid and that they have tools to share those opinions and those views on relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I guess I'll just say it out loud is that I also share in the frustration when people don't do that.
And what you said is so wise, Elizabeth, and it's something I notice across a lot of activist communities, a lot of focus on what's not being done by others. And it turns into a you're the villain here game. And instead, it takes away energy from the actual cause. So I see that as a sort of general problem within a lot of activist communities, unfortunately. So very important point. Yeah, I think we don't have time for any more Q&As, I'm
I
afraid.
know. But that was such a good discussion, though. Thank you, Steph. Thank you, Julia, for what you brought forward today. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for your time, your attention, your energy. Just so grateful to have all of you here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, beautiful, brilliant.
We hope you enjoyed this episode.
If you want to get in touch with us, go to the podcast description. You can share your feedback, suggest themes for future series, and find ways to work with us.
If you liked this, leave us a 5-star review with a comment. It really helps our sweet little baby of a podcast grow.
And if you didn't like it, maybe don't leave a review. Just go complain to a friend.
Thanks so much for listening.
All the love.